Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick. We're in Phoenix, in Arizona, at ETSI's NFV meeting number 8. All the great and the good are gathered here, and one of them is with me now. I'm talking with Bruno, who is with Orange Labs Networks, where he is Senior Standardization Manager. Bruno, welcome. This is a big gathering, and it's a very important gathering because we have just seen the end of Phase 1 of NFV. It actually finished yesterday, and Phase 2 started yesterday. So we're at this changeover, this inflection point, where we're moving from the informative stage of NFV to the normative stage of NFV. So I'd like to begin by asking you, with your orange hat on, what do you think of the success of Phase 1 to begin with?
Well, I think Phase 1, we can be proud of having created a common vocabulary around NFV, a common architectural framework, a common set of requirements, functional requirements that all the components of the framework have to fulfill, and something that is shared by both the IT and the telco industry, so it's pretty important. And we have, I think, a very good starting point for Phase 2 with that.
And it happened very quickly. I mean, it's less than 2 years since NFV burst upon to the scene.
Yeah, if we look to the level of complexity, indeed, it's very good to have achieved that within 2 years. But on the other hand, 2 years is a lot. If we could have achieved that in 1 year, I would have been even more happy.
Well, I still think it's pretty good. It's a pretty positive message. Let's talk about Phase 2, which has just begun. There's an awful lot of work to be done. Here at this gathering, there are somewhere in the region of 40 distinct subjects being debated and talked about and being prioritised before things can move forward. How are those priorities being placed? Who decides what's happening?
Yeah, well, first, there are 40 what we call work item descriptions, but these are not really 40 completely different topics. There are, I would say, less than 10 major topics. And most of them related to how to make sure that the next specification phase will enable true interoperability between vendors. So your question was, how is it prioritized? Well, it's, I would say, consensus-driven. Each of us have a different priority. Although most operators have the same priorities, but well, at least there are different group of people with different priorities. We try to reach a consensus to make something reasonable, which means not having too many work items started at the same time, simply because it will not be manageable and we will not have the resources to work properly on too many things in parallel. But this prioritization work, I think, should be done this week, and it's not the most complex part of the work. The real difficulties will start with the technical work, I would say.
And that will follow when these priorities have been set?
Yeah.
Okay. And what then are your hopes and expectations for Phase 2? When Phase 2 ends, what will have been achieved?
I hope that what will have been achieved is true interoperability, which means so in Phase 1 we have defined an architectural framework with identifying different functional blocks that have to talk together to support this NFV technology. We have even specified to a certain degree which kind of information should be exchanged between the different blocks. But that's not enough to be able to connect a functional block from one vendor to a functional block to another one, especially in the area of management and orchestration. And of course, that's not acceptable. So we hope that Phase 2 will enable that, so that Phase 2 will deliver specifications that will enable that. This also includes the portability, what we call portability of virtual network functions from one type of server to another, which is one of the major objectives of NFV, but which is not yet a reality. Today it's still very challenging to take one virtual network function from vendor A running. It can run very well on the server from vendor B and it less well, so to say, on the server of vendor C, but that's simply because the specifications are not precise enough in some way, or because we have not yet specified the proper abstraction layers on top of hardware. But that's really something that should be addressed in phase 2 as soon as possible. I hope before 2 years. If 1 year will be better.
Well, currently the ETSI NFV has an extra 2 years of life.
Yeah.
So, and from what I've heard, it could go on beyond that. So, but there are stages, obviously stages, phase 1, phase 2. Presumably, in all likelihood, there will be a phase 3 in due course.
If there is a phase 3 would mean something after these 2 years.
Yeah.
Difficult to say. My concern is more than 2 years is already a lot. 2 extra years is already a lot, and our main objective, which is interoperability on all interfaces, so multi-vendor interoperability, we should really achieve it in less than 1 year, because otherwise too many proprietary solutions will have been created by vendors due to the lack of detailed standards. And after that, obviously they will be probably a bit reluctant to migrate to a standard solution, and that's perfectly understandable. So we should be as quick as possible.
So the quicker the better.
If we want to be effective.
Hand in hand with interoperability goes openness, of course, and NFV is predicated on the notion of openness, although openness and what openness is seems to be different things to different people. Do you find that's the case? Does openness for Orange, is it different to openness for BT or another operator?
Not so much. I think that for most operators, in the context of NFV, openness means interoperability, so the ability to take a component, an architectural component from one vendor and connect it to a component from another vendor. Some people also, behind this word openness, have in mind the notion of open source, which is valid as well, and the open source can indeed contribute to accelerate the implementation of NFV. But I will rate interoperability first if I had to classify things.
A final question to you. You are Senior Standardization Manager with Orange Labs Networks.
Yeah.
So it's about standardization as well. So all these 3 items are intertwined, closely intertwined. You have openness, interoperability, which are 2 sides of the same coin in many ways, and also standardization. How do you manage the interests of all 3 to make it coherent?
Well, to achieve interoperability, you need all players to follow the same rules, or the same technical rules. And these rules can be established according to 2 different approaches, I would say. One is conventional standardization. So we write on a set of papers how the system should behave, which kind of messages the server should send, etc. And the other approach is open source, where you start from a description of functional requirements, and you try to implement directly these requirements in terms of executable code. If most of the players are participating to this open source effort, then it gives you almost the same result than conventional standards. That's why, for example, in the context of NFV, this Open NFV initiative was launched. This one is open source oriented. Mm-hmm. But at this stage, we cannot be sure that this is the right way to do. We hope so. So to be, how to say that, to be on the safe side, we have a mixed approach. So for one part of the architectural framework, we follow this open source approach. For the other part, we follow a more conventional standardization approach. And we will see which part is progressing faster than the other.
We shall indeed. I'd just like to thank you for your time, Bruno. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.